All right, thank you very much, Charlie. It's good to be back up here. This is the day's last full panel. Last year's conference drew attention to the deafening silence of business in Asia on LGBT equality. In granting LGBT couples their full rights under the law and in vocally championing their cause, Asia lags far behind in the West. Now, as we've heard today, in many countries, LGBT individuals are accepted as long as they sort of stay in their lane, but that is a far cry from full equality. So what I want to discuss today with my panel, and I'd like to invite them up now, please, is how approaches change across the region and how do views change across the age gap. So with me today, we have a wonderful panel. We have Gigi Chao, who is the Executive Vice Chair of Cheuk Nang, a Hong Kong-based holding company. We have Mr. Raghu Raman, who is the author of Every Man's War, an analysis of terrorism and security issues in India, and the group presidents of Reliance Industries. And we have Mr. MK Goh, who is the CEO of Karex, a Malaysian condo manufacturer. So please. Gigi, let's start with you. I wonder if you could tell us sort of a personal story at first, the letter and sort of how you came to champion these issues in the public eye.
Tell my story as
Yeah.
how? Oh, well, I got married with my wife
Yes.
in 2012.
Yes.
And it happened, it dawned on me suddenly that we were the first openly lesbian couple to be quite visible in the spotlight in the Hong Kong media. And for some reason, other international media, such as The Economist, surged some interest as well. And at the time, I think it rather caught my father by surprise, and he wanted to sort of press undo. And it just kind of made the thing get bigger. And so it kind of, by his trying to undo my marriage with my wife, it kind of made it very permanent and very much part of the collective psyche of Hong Kong that we now have an example of a lesbian marriage, a lesbian couple, and a disapproving father. And here I am now.
And has that, can I ask, has his disapproval remained constant, or has he sort of opened up by seeing you?
I think he has opened up a bit. I think he's come to terms with it, and he's accepted it on his own terms. I don't think he can, in your words, he's a far cry from full acceptance, as in, come Sean, let's have dinner together, let's be buddy-buddy. But I think he is... I think he doesn't need to be reminded that I'm a lesbian, and he's accepted that I have, my partner is a woman, and that it's part of my life, and it's going to be, I hope, a permanent part of my life.
So in light of that, in light of your personal experiences and your experiences in the business community here in Hong Kong, what would you say are the main obstacles to greater LGBT acceptance across Asia?
I think, of course, the greatest obstacle, of course, is the lack of legislation, right? Because Hong Kong, unfortunately, we have a bit of a dysfunctional situation in Hong Kong in terms of governance, and that's partly historical, to be fair. I mean, we have a post-colonial psyche which the people of Hong Kong have this constitutional identity crisis, where we have difficult identifying ourselves as Chinese nationals, and that's been the cause of a lot of problems on a government level. Is that people of Hong Kong perceive our government to lack legitimacy in that regard, and so to try to push legislation, I mean. Kudos to the Equal Opportunities Commission, but it's very, very difficult, especially with an issue as controversial as same-sex marriage and gay rights and marriage equality. And so, really, I mean, Hong Kong is a fabulous place for business. It's really a business heaven, you know, low taxes, really vibrant workforce, educated, hardworking people, and yet at the same time you have kind of this living hell almost, this kind of paradox of really good for business place, and yet, you know, the living standards of people are declining, and there's social immobility. And probably for my generation, we will be the first generation where, you know, people in my age group are earning less in real terms than their parents when they were the same age. So there's this social mobility issue that's really cutting to the heart of how young people perceive themselves and the futures that they embrace. So this is sort of the wider context that it plays out in. And so you've got a government that's doing the bare minimum, or they're afraid to do anything that's overtly controversial. You have businesses that are quite powerful, really, in the region. And then you have kind of the everyday citizen that's kind of squashed in the corner almost, and a little bit depressed even. And now you are trying to kind of mix you know, the priorities of the three, and LGBT being a minority group is really at a huge disadvantage in some ways, because it's almost a dog-eat-dog and everybody for themselves kind of mentality for the everyday citizen. And so I think it's really up to businesses that have a conscience to do something to uphold human dignity and uphold the standards of human behavior, and like Su Ming was saying, just allow everybody to set a benchmark for what is acceptable in terms of our colleagues and how we treat other people that are perhaps have different ideas, religions, or just different sexual preferences from ourselves, and how we can still be friends and still work together and still create really vibrant, really creative workplaces that make you know, Hong Kong people proud. I think that's what we want.
So the lack of legislation, the responsibility lies principally with citizens who aren't pushing hard enough, businesses who aren't pushing hard enough. I mean, we'll assume sort of that politicians are going to be cowards, as they always are. So whose job is it to sort of give them a shove?
I think it's everyone's job. But mostly I was mentioning this kind of post-colonial mindset, and it's this mindset that sets people back, because I think people are accustomed to just kind of keeping their heads down and work. And I think the past 20 years has kind of been a testimony to how that really, there's something lacking in just that mentality, and we really have to push change forward. And you know, we have this democracy, in inverted commas, that we enjoy in Hong Kong. We have a freedom of press, and so we have lots of voices, but it's up to even the LGBT community ourselves to stand up and be heard. And you know, even for example, in my case, it does step on some toes and it stirs people up, and you know, you get hate mail still once in a while. But there are also a lot of supporters, and that's really it's a celebration of you know, the human dramas that make life worthwhile.
So let's brainstorm a way to influence business. Let's imagine that there's, you know, standing before you, there's a, say, 60, 70-year-old heterosexual man. Maybe he's conservative, maybe he's apolitical, wants to stay out of politics, focus on the bottom line. What's the case you make to him for supporting greater inclusion? Is it a business and economic case, or is it a moral case?
I think it's just, well, if you call it a moral case, it's really just a case of being a friendly human being, isn't it? It's a case of being a decent person, and you know, asking this person, do you actually know any gay, lesbian, queer, bisexual, intersex persons in your own life? Do you have any gay friends, for example? And if he says no, you have to ask him why not.
Yes.
It's probably because, you know, people don't feel comfortable coming out to him, and he's sort of shut his eyes and ears from, you know, the realities of the issue. And in some ways, I think, you know, our lives in social media plays towards that as well. You know, this kind of whole algorithm of cookies or whatever that, you know, so that you see the appropriate ads, or you see message threads that are aligned to things that we like, things that we want to see. And that kind of almost shelters ourselves into this cocoon of, you know, self-approval, and so the messages that we disapprove of becomes more distant to us, even though that person might be standing right next to us. So I think it's an effort that we have to make to reach out to people that are different from us and try to promote greater understanding.
You see a difference between younger and older people?
There's definitely a huge difference. And I think, to be fair, I think it really stems from, again, history. Since the year 2000, the LGBT community has really made huge leaps and bounds, in terms of acceptance, especially in places like the United States and in the UK and Europe. But of course, Asia lags behind on this issue. Of course, there's also the issue of religion that plays into the fear and the greater picture of acceptance. But I do think the older generation have memories of when it was still a criminal behavior, and so it's really kind of engaging with the older generation that's going to be very important as well, especially when people live longer now.
And the arguments that work with the older generation are what?
Well, for me, I don't know if I count as an old person, but I think, for example, if I talk to my mom and dad, I think the arguments that work is to know a person personally that is from the community, that is gay, lesbian, or transgender, or intersex. So if you don't know a person personally that's gay, then it's easier to conceptualize and kind of cast it to the junkyards of subconsciousness and never really talk about the issue and avoid it and let it be a deafening silence. But if it was someone if it was Tiffany the receptionist, or it was Auntie Mary, or someone that's close to your heart, then it becomes something much more visceral, something that you want to do something about, something that you want to drive forward. And if you don't have that, then it's difficult to have any sort of conversation.
Yes. So given that, I know this can be somewhat controversial, do you think that LGBT people have a responsibility to live openly, to be open with everybody?
It's a very personal choice.
Yes.
I think it's a choice that a lot of people, especially in Hong Kong, don't understand.
Yes.
Because I think as individuals, we look for clues as to our behavior, as to what acceptable behavior is. So when I step through those doors into this room, for example, I realize everyone sat down, so I quickly find a seat. And there's sort of these outward visual, very kind of open displays of what acceptable behavior is. And so being a gay or a lesbian person, I do have a responsibility to uphold this kind of open visual behavior. So I'm not going to, clear out a table and kiss my partner in the middle of the conference room, but I do need to tell everyone that I am lesbian. And so I can't expect people to know or so on. But however, it is a very personal choice, and most people in Hong Kong find it difficult to make it an open display, make it a public statement of your individuality. And it's, again, something cultural about it as well. But I think times are a-changing, and we do have to move forward in this regard if we want to see greater inclusion and a more inclusive, more embracing community of diversity.
Thank you. Thank you. MK, I'd like to turn to you now. And we'll talk about something that hasn't really come up. We've talked a lot about corporate policies internally, about sort of diversity and inclusion, but let's talk about product development, just after all, how a company interacts with its consumers.
Sure.
So tell the audience, for people who aren't familiar with it, a bit about Karex and what you do.
Okay, well, Karex is a condom maker. We probably make 1 in every 5 condoms that is used today in the world. We make for a lot of people in the branded business. And I think one thing that a lot of people do not know is that half the world's condom is actually either given out for free or highly subsidized by governments. So what you see on the shelves at your Watsons and Mannings are basically only 50% of the market. So it's a business which I'm exposed at a very young age, and I must say that it's a very interesting journey for me in terms of my career, in terms of seeing how much in terms of the requirements of, a condom as a tool for protection. So when it first came in, we had requests for things like oral dams. Oral dams are usually used by a lot of the lesbian communities in the US for oral sex, for oral vaginal, oral anal sex. Then again came across my experience when I talked to a lot of NGOs in Pakistan, where they are not allowed to bring their wives or partners, or being caught with someone in bed unmarried, you could be stoned to death. So they had to bring along young boys onto their trips, months on the road. And, they came about telling us about what is required in terms of lubricants and how can you pack a condom and a lubricant together, because in the end of the day, people were giving out a lot of condoms. But then they said that the condoms failed because, they were using engine oil in terms of lubricants. Right? It's a place which you not expect to use it. But that's what's the reality of it. We had, again, male prisons in Spain that came to us as if you can actually pack a condom and a lubricant together. So there is a lot of product development that really needs to be beyond just what we do in terms of CSR campaigns and corporate social response and corporate policies. But I think in terms of condoms, what we have really done is that we have actually even had a Pride range. And we all know that today, whether you're in the US, you're in Europe, you're in Asia today, people are very shy when it still comes to condoms, right? A condom survey still shows that, people take an average of 5 to 12 seconds choosing their condoms. And in my job here is how do I actually make, the use of condoms and the approach of people looking at condoms very differently. So that's where I think in terms of product innovation, it's actually very, very important to look into the inclusion of other communities. So in terms of, let's say, anal, if you even look into today, if anyone to read, the instruction leaflet in a pack of condom, today it's only for vaginal sex. It's not even for anal sex. So today that's what we've embarked. Karex today has worked with the CDC in the US to basically do a clinical study, and hopefully very soon you can actually claim that condoms are also safe for anal intercourse.
And so that sends a message to the community that's using them of inclusivity. It also, you hope it also has sort of some clinical effects as well.
Yes.
It makes people more likely to use them.
Yeah, the fact that, if a first-time user were to look into it and says that, well, it's only for vaginal sex, right? Then, is it safe if I were to have an anal intercourse?
Mm-hmm. And has this been, is this something that you started? Is this something that Karex has always done, listening to the community?
Well, the business started by my late grandfather. I'm third generation in the business, and when we came into this business, the likes of people like Durex and Okamoto has already been in the industry since the 1920s. So it's a very mature industry, and for me, this industry has changed tremendously in the last 25 years. It all started with safety, but today it's beyond safety, it's pleasure. Because a lot of people ask me, how do you actually, he says, they always tell me that putting on a condom is like going into a shower with a raincoat on. So my job is to basically try to make that whole experience much better. So in terms of innovation, again, what I see today is that there's a lot of lubricants, there's a lot of there's a lot of features in the condom to make a lot of people comfortable when it comes to using condoms.
I wonder, having promised we're going to talk about product development, I'd like to talk at least a little about inclusion policies. Now, you mentioned that yours differ in your American and Malaysian offices. How do they differ? Why? And how common do you think that is?
Well, Karex is a founded business in Malaysia, and in Malaysia we are predominantly Muslim country, where sexual intercourse between men is still punishable by law, up to 20 years, and We had cases where our opposition leader is still today put in jail for being accused of having sexual intercourse with another man.
And aside from him, is that law often enforced?
Well, I think that's the thing, is that being a person who lives in Malaysia, in fact, with a brand, we have a brand in Malaysia. In fact, there is a gay party every weekend in one of the buildings, parties every week. But I think we are quite liberal, but I think it's always been used on a political stance to actually, to catch political opponents. I see a difference in terms of where our US operations are. In fact, the CEO of my US operation is an open gay person. And I learned a lot, of my experience personally with him in terms of running the business and in terms of looking at how do you include the LGBT community within product innovation and in terms of communication with the users, with the condom users themselves. But from what I see, it's that it is a big challenge, definitely, in Malaysia because of the culture. And hence, any movement for change would definitely need to come from the government side. That's my view in terms of where Malaysia is.
Does that mean that you don't think businesses could do much to influence
political
change
think,
there?
Yeah, definitely there will be, I think businesses is very important. I think where the big retailers needs to put more pressure. I can see that the pressure from them today is coming into a lot of areas of sustainable environmental greenhouse effects. But if that can be included into company policies, because over here in where our factories are in Malaysia and Thailand, we're still very traditional. We're still very conservative, and any push would definitely be a positive push.
So have you had pushback from those conservative elements of society? Is this something that you have had to weather as a company?
So far, not yet. But as a company ourselves, as we're getting more into the markets, today definitely a inclusive policy would definitely help us in the marketplace.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Captain Raman, you have had an unusual set of careers. You began in the military. You were captain. You then were CEO of India's first national intelligence grid, and you now work in the corporate world. I wonder what lessons in diversity and inclusion have you learned in each of those careers, and are they applicable to each other?
I think, all the three careers, as you pointed out, a lot of my friends often ask me also that out of these three careers in the military and then the corporate world and then the government, which one of these was the most difficult one? I don't have the answer to that one, but I can tell you the easiest was the army, because there at least you knew which side the enemy was.
Yes.
The remaining two careers is kind of difficult to figure out. But I believe that the lessons of diversity, and I don't want to talk just about LGBT or transgender or whatever. I think the power of diversity is universal in all of them. And I think the journey of discovery, if we are able to discover the essential force multiplying effect of diversity, then if we are able to take that to a moral high ground, to a business high ground, then everything else just flows from there. And I have to tell you this, you asked me this earlier about my personal story about how I discovered this. So many years ago, I was in Angola as a UN peacekeeper, and I was there as a blue helmet. So those of you who have an idea about how UN troops are deployed, you know that they come from all different countries. And so we had the Russians giving us air support, we had the Portuguese giving us communications, and we had the Romanians giving us the medical support. And I remember the first day we arrived in this big camp in Angola in a small province there. And we were getting ready to settle down. And there was this Romanian doctor who came up and said, when are you going to start your PT? PT is like physical training that armies do. Any army, ex-army here? Okay. So that's the first activity which usually begins in the day. And this Romanian doctor is very, very, enthusiastic about watching our PT. So after 2 or 3 days when we settle down and he comes in and we go out early in the morning for our run and push-ups and sit-ups and the regular stuff that soldiers do. And when I came back from that run, I saw this Romanian doctor with a very long face. He was extremely disappointed. And I asked him, what happened? He said, I'd been looking forward to the Indian battalion coming, and I was thinking you guys would do yoga and stuff like that. And here you're doing these push-ups and sit-ups exactly like what we do. So, that was an epiphany for me. Of course, I pointed out to him, in case you're coming in the evening to the officers' mess, we neither have elephants nor snake charmers just. So, just to put that in context. But that night, as a soldier, I started thinking about our own history. And when I went back to our own mythology, our own history of India, I discovered that some of our greatest warriors, because when you are a soldier, one of the things, after all, you have to understand, this is not just India. Every country takes a group of young, fairly okay people and deliberately maladjusts them. Of course. How do you take a young man who has nothing against anyone else personally and train him to put a wire around somebody's neck and cut it in half? You have to maladjust that person. So this whole element of becoming macho, I remember that once I had a cut in my hand and I'd gone to the medical attendant and said to put stitches. And when he was starting to put stitches, I asked him, aren't you going to put some anesthesia? He said, well, you're from a combat arm. I said, well, we get hurt also. It's not just because... But this whole element of trying to make you macho, and then realizing that when you look back in your own history, you find some of the greatest warriors that we had. They were transgenders. They were people who moved from one... they were cross-dressers. They were effeminate. They were great poets. They used to change their... tenor of writing into a feminine tenor to praise masculine quality. And that did nothing to their fighting skills. They were just as lethal or as deadly. So suddenly you realize that this whole persona that has been created is perhaps wrong. And that was the beginning of my journey to try and discover the power of diversity. And to answer your question, I have found the elements of diversity being a force multiplier in every career. And I'll give you an example from my government stint, and this is not sexual diversity, this is intellectual diversity, because a lot of us also have intellectual arrogance. We feel that if we are educated, then we are better qualified than someone who's differently educated or a tribal. He's by definition inferior to us. And this is a story I'm sure a lot of you from Hong Kong will connect with it, because I come from a state of Kerala. And those of you who've been to India or been to Kerala specifically, you know it's got a very long coastline. And there was a friend of mine who was a district collector there, sort of administrator. And one year he had some surplus funds left, so because that belt had a lot of fishermen, he decided to buy them GPSs. And this is a good 15 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, when GPSs were still a novelty, and these fishermen are trying to figure out what to do with the GPS. Eventually they figure it out. Now, my friend forgot that these fishermen, they were the progeny of centuries of seagoing seafarers. So they didn't need a GPS to come back. They could look at the waves, the birds, the clouds, and they could figure their way out to come back home. But here's what the fishermen did. They would go to the fish market. They would collect all the garbage and rotting vegetables. They would put it in a sack, and they would take it out into the high seas and dump it there and mark that spot with a GPS and come back the next day and find it teeming with fish. So my intellectual friend gave them the GPS to come back home, and they used it to go into the sea. So many times this power of diversity is not something that you can define. You have to put diverse people inside a bowl, mix them up, and what comes out will be quite shocking and surprising even to the people who decided to put them in the first place. And I think that is the power that has to be leveraged first, and everything else will just follow.
So how can army-style diversity is enforced by court-martials, combat, shoot to kill. Corporate managers don't have that power yet.
You'll be surprised.
How do you enforce, how do you encourage that sort of diversity without the exigencies pressing down?
So there is this misconception that, of course, the military is a very authoritarian, style of command. And very often you are called and told that, congratulations, you have just volunteered for this mission. That's the way you're informed, that you have volunteered. And that is a kind of authoritarian way. And the corporate sector depends a lot on material leverages, promotions, bonuses, and all of that. But I think the true purpose of the true power of a team is unleashed when they are combined for a higher purpose. And that is true in the military also. Because in the military, nobody can force you to join the special forces. It's completely voluntary. And if you were looking out to save your skin, then the smart thing is not to join those units where the attrition rates are very high. But then there is a sense of nobility in doing that. There is a sense of eliteness in doing that.
Yes.
Now, if the same sense of nobility and eliteness, and you sort of referred to that in terms of appealing to the conscience and saying that you have to be a bigger person, and you have to be a larger person, and that largeness comes from acceptance of differences, not by enforcing your parochialism on other people. That's when the balance starts to change a little bit. And I have found that that works both in the military, after all, soldiers risk their lives during national calamities also. When they're not fighting an enemy, they risk their lives to, just yesterday, you found people in uniform shot down an enemy, but as soon as the enemy was shot down, they immediately rushed to help him save his life. So that sense of a larger purpose, if that is brought into a team, then I don't think these control measures are required to get them to unleash their true potential.
And an economic and business case is not required either if you're talking about appealing to conscience, appealing to sort of being the bigger person.
Economics does matter, and I think since we were talking about Asia now, the advantage I think that Asia has got, two advantages. One, of course, is, as I often mention in this, I don't think India or Asia needs to learn anything in this sphere, in LGBT or diversity. I don't think we need to learn anything. We need to unlearn the 400 years of colonial presence. Because if we go back into our own history, whether it's our mythology, whether it's our epics, we find it all there. It's, some of the most revered, heroes and heroines of our history, they have been there, done that in every sphere of diversity. So what we need to do is to unlearn. And that's one advantage. So you just have to take people back to what they used to be a few hundred years ago and not have them to reinvent something new. They just have to rediscover what they already had. The other advantage is that the youth bulge of Asia. Now, so I come from a company which is in many ways got a schizophrenic DNA. So we've got a very strong manufacturing DNA where we've got experience counts. So if you've spent 20 years in oil and refining and all that, you are better than a person who spent 15, who's better than a person who spent 5. But we also have launched a huge telecom network now. Now in the telecom network, experience is actually a disadvantage because you are looking at the young people coming out with innovative ideas. So in a way, what is happening is that this large, giant corporate, and this is true for many large, giant corporates, they are finding that their center of gravity is shifting out from the core headquarters into the customer base, into the employee base. Now, if the headquarter doesn't move with the center of gravity, it's going to topple. So that advantage of the young, who are obviously more risk-taking, have more empathy, have got less baggage, are more experiment. Today, I think in the afternoon, Parmesh spoke about Godrej and how Godrej's activities gives them a strategic advantage when they go out in recruitment. Even straight people prefer to work with companies who have a liberal outlook, even if that doesn't affect them personally. They still want to gravitate towards those sort of companies. So when it starts becoming a competitive advantage, and very soon, right now it's competitive advantage, to my mind in a couple of years, it will be an existential crisis. Organizations who will not be agile and adapt to what their employees want, and more importantly, what their customers want, they will pretty soon perish. So it's not, I don't think it's something, maybe in some cases for a few years it was nice to have in your company report and triple bottom line reporting and all of that, or in a group photograph you have that diversity. But I think in the future, if we don't focus on diversity as a competitive advantage, it will become an existential crisis for many of the companies.
That's a very good pivot point to open the floor to questions. We've got about 10 minutes left, and I'm utterly blinded, so hop up and down or something. All right, if there are no questions, sorry, there's one right in the front. Again.
You like to be on camera.
Sorry, can we get Michael a microphone?
Hi, I have a question for MK. I'm just curious if your company keeps data on how many people in the LGBT community actually use your product and what the proportion is compared to non-LGBT people.
No, unfortunately not. We're not able to get that. It's very difficult, but there is definitely a range of products that we usually produce. not very big right now in terms of super strength condoms, or they call extra strength condoms. They're usually intended for anal sex. You know, it has definitely some demand for it, but today with the quality of condoms generally available today, it's people do not really distinguish. So it's very difficult to tell that. But you know, when we talk about inclusion as well, we go beyond just whether you're you know, your sexual orientation. In fact, today we're launching you know, a condom that's actually bespoke in terms of custom sizing. So that's where you know, it's the whole idea that that you know, everybody should be covered. Because I was talking to a condom expert once, and he told me that the condoms in today's market you find only fits 20% of the population. Okay, and generally most men, when you ask them if you like to wear a condom, it's generally no, because it doesn't fit them. You know, if a lot of men actually has this idea that we've always been told that one size fits all, but actually it doesn't. So what I probably have beyond that number is today we actually have more numbers of penis sizes actually than whether, you know, their sexual orientation. So that is actually a very powerful tool in terms of us designing condoms for the future, for more people to be using condoms. We've also worked with multiple foundations. We've worked with people like the Tom of Finland Foundation, so might have a condom here somewhere. It's you know, it's yeah, that's one of the Tom of Finland Foundation condoms. So in the end of the day, it's basically designs, how we actually include designs to get people to be, you know, to break that barrier in terms of shyness. So it creates a conversation where you can actually talk to someone about that. And to me as well, you know, it was rather new, and the whole idea today that when people talk about it, and when more people talk about it, the whole barrier of, you know, safe sex, and, you know, about whether you're gay, lesbian, whatever it is, you know, it's all about sexual wellness. You need that.
Other questions? Yes.
I've got a microphone here. Hi, Julia Elliott from Morgan Stanley. This is for Gigi Chao. Hi. Wonderful to hear from you all. Thank you. Wanted to hear, we've seen a lot of progress with the international firms signing the EOC statement recently and supporting LGBT inclusion in Hong Kong. Just wanted to get your view on what role you see local homegrown Hong Kong firms taking in really picking up where some of the international firms are right now in the conversation.
Thank you for your question, Julia. I think for a lot of local firms, there's still a lot of fear surrounding the topic, and I think there's still a lot of stigma regarding the issue of gender identity and sexual orientation. And so I think, I mean, good time to bring it up is, you know, we're bidding for the Gay Games in a few years' time. And fingers crossed, we got shortlisted, so we actually do need big events like the Gay Games to make it very public, and we do need to lobby for the Hong Kong government to get the support in. And I think when you have such a large-scale event that brings the topic onto, brings a positive light to the topic, and also makes it acceptable as an activity, as a city hosting this sort of activity. I think, I hope, the local businesses will follow suit. In some ways, it's a chicken and an egg, because I'm sure Benita at Gay Games will tell you they're trying to lobby local businesses on board as well. And so you get chicken and egg, but you have to, you know, baby steps, step by step, and hopefully something collectively big will be accomplished.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes, in the back.
Andrew Chidgey from AIDS Concern in Hong Kong. Thank you for being such positive role models as business leaders supporting diversity and inclusion. That's fantastic. I wanted to ask you about internal and external support for diversity and inclusion. It seems as though even within companies that are doing a lot about internal action on diversity and inclusion, they don't always think that it's their role to talk within the community about that. I wonder if you've got views about how we can encourage more businesses to do that.
Is that, sorry, to the panel generally?
I don't know. They're also qualified to answer that.
Okay. Anyone? It's open.
Well, no, I think there is obviously much more control that an organization has to its internal ecosystem. And that's true for any form of diversity, even if you're trying to include a lot of differently challenged people in your organization. You can design buildings. The moment they step into the gate, it becomes easier for them. But can you do that external to your ecosystem? Your effectiveness definitely goes down a little bit. And especially in sensitive issues, and I'm sure Parmesh spoke about it, especially in India, where the legality of LGBT is still a concern. It becomes very difficult for an organization to sort of, to put it very bluntly, stick its neck out into the ecosystem and find that it's the only one sticking it out. But my sense is that as more and more corporates start doing this, and there is a sense of critical mass coming in, and see, as a demography, if we are looking towards the lawmakers and those who have the power to make some of these changes, then the demography of this is it's a minority. So by themselves, it's unlikely that they'll be able to move the needle. It's only when the ecosystem starts empathizing with them, and like in the campuses, we see that very clearly in B schools in India. We see that the young students, and especially some of the premier Ivy League colleges, they prefer to go into companies. So they're voting with their feet. They're voting with their presence into those organizations. Now, if we start, if we can build that critical mass, then I'm sure that even in the external environment, we'll be able to exert a much higher degree of influence than we are able to do today. And to that extent, I think forums such as these, where organizations can draw energy from each other, and they can, they realize they're not the only ones doing it, there are others doing it, and there are success stories everywhere, and these success stories start getting connected. My sense is that critical mass will arrive, and that's when we'll be able to perhaps say that we have almost the same kind of influencing control, influence, not control, but influence on the external ecosystem as what we have in the internal.
We have time for one or two more. Yes, right there.
Hi, Christian here from CBRE. So a couple of you have mentioned this post-colonial mindset and that people need to get over this in order to move forward. I just wanted to know how you think we can do this, especially in countries like India and Singapore, where it's not really post, because these countries embrace Section 377, and it's kind of become institutionalized within society and within governments. So I was just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
We're all British colonies, right? So, I mean, Singapore, Malaysia, Hong Kong. And in the UK, homosexuality was decriminalized in 1967. And it's taken them a whole 40 years to really move the whole spectrum and really get rid of the kind of the minor details of other laws pertaining to homosexual criminal behavior, and to arrive at the full circle in 2003 with the Civil Partnership Act. So in some ways, it's taken a long time, and I can only speak, I suppose, for Hong Kong, not the other countries, but I think we, in some ways, take pride in ourselves being a post-colony, oddly. Not oddly, I mean, with good reason, but there are also a lot of things that require reform. I mean, people grow and civilizations, mindsets change and attitudes change, and it's really to be able to be a mature society that knows how to take laws and so on forward, and that would do the trick. But in some ways, I think reform is a tricky process, especially for Hong Kong. Mere mention of reform and there's just protest everywhere, and you can never get a consensus, and nobody really, there's no such thing as a compromise anymore. Nobody sits down to talk and find a middle path. So it's quite difficult, but I think, I don't know, I mean, Hong Kong government is just, they're trying to do what they can. They're trying to make do with this kind of situation. But I think laws need to be enacted sooner or later, and it's a matter of time, because I think the younger generation sees it as, just the way of life. And I think, a lot of young college graduates, they go overseas to be educated in prestigious universities. They come back and they realize how archaic, some of the laws in Hong Kong are. And
Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but I think we're being whisked off stage.
Okay.
We have to end. Please join me in thanking this panel, and Charlie Goddard is going to turn us over to London. Sorry about that. Thank you very much.